It was just after 6 p.m. when 14-year-old Hannah Wells took her dog out for a walk. It wasn't unusual. She did it almost every evening, right after dinner. The sky was still light. The sun was dipping behind the trees near the ridge, and the air was quiet. She was wearing a light blue hoodie and faded jeans. Her parents remember that clearly. Her dog, Toby, was a small brown terrier, friendly, loud. That day, he didn't bark. Hannah didn't come back. At first, her father thought she'd stopped to talk to a neighbor, but after 20 minutes, he got in the truck and drove around. Nothing. By the time it got dark, panic had set in. Police were called. Flashlights scanned the fields, the trails, the roadside ditches. They found Toby near a broken fence, alone, but no sign of Hannah. That night, their quiet town changed. People locked their doors. Neighbors left porch lights on, and Hannah's name became the one thing nobody could say without pausing. By morning, search teams were out with dogs and volunteers. Locals brought coffee and flashlights, some with maps of the wooded areas nearby. Hannah's parents stayed near the trail where Toby had been found, hoping for anything, a piece of clothing, a footprint, a sound in the trees. But nothing came. Not that day. Not the next. The investigators asked about Hannah's routine. Did she ever run away before? Had she argued with anyone? The answer was always no. She was calm, kind, responsible. She loved books, took care of her dog, and didn't stay out late. Her friends all said the same thing. Hannah wasn't the type to disappear. The dog, Toby, didn't help much. He just kept walking in circles near the same stretch of fence. Animal control said he seemed scared but uninjured. No blood, no sign of a struggle. The only strange detail was his leash. It wasn't broken or unclipped. It was simply missing. Flyers went up on telephone poles, gas stations, and school walls. The Wells family printed hundreds. Hannah's school photo, her age, what she was last seen wearing. People in town started organizing night patrols. Some searched the woods with binoculars. Others checked drainage tunnels and abandoned sheds. Her father barely slept. Every time he heard a car slow down near their house, he looked out the window. Her mother stopped cooking. Meals sat untouched. The dog stayed close to the back door, whining some nights without reason. After a week, the media showed up. Local news first, then reporters from out of state. They asked hard questions. Some even suggested she'd run off, that maybe she wasn't the girl everyone thought she was. But her family never believed that. They kept a light on in her bedroom window. It became a silent message, a way to say, if you can see this, come home. 3 weeks in, the search slowed down. Fewer people came by. Police presence thinned out. New cases pulled resources elsewhere. The Wells family tried to keep things going, reaching out to news stations, asking for help online, speaking to anyone who would listen. But behind the effort, the silence grew heavier. Hannah's room stayed untouched. Her backpack still hung on the doorknob, books stacked beside her bed. Her favorite cassette recorder sat on the shelf, batteries removed long ago. Her dad didn't go in much, but sometimes he'd stand by the doorway, staring at her things, hoping for something to feel different. It never did. The neighborhood went quiet, too. Parents kept their kids inside. Playgrounds were empty after dark, and people stopped asking questions, not because they didn't care, but because no one had answers, and that was worse. The seasons changed. Leaves fell, snow came, then spring returned. A full year passed. Anniversaries are supposed to bring closure. This one didn't. The police officially labeled it a cold case. No suspects, no leads, just a line in a folder somewhere. Hannah's father never stopped looking. He kept a map in the garage with pins stuck in it, places he'd searched, trails he walked alone, barns he got permission to check. Every so often, he'd get a call from someone claiming to know something. A truck spotted on the road. A girl who looked like Hannah in another town, but none of it led anywhere. Then one afternoon, a local hunter stopped by their house. He wasn't a close friend, just someone from town. He said he'd been testing a new thermal drone over the ridge where Hannah disappeared, and that he'd seen something odd, something that didn't fit the terrain. The hunter showed them the footage on a small tablet. It wasn't much, just a wide, grainy scan of the hillside. But one frame caught their attention. A rectangular shape, half buried, radiating more heat than the cold ground around it. At first, the family thought it might be a fallen tree, but the edges were too straight. The man offered to take them there the next morning. That night, Hannah's dad didn't sleep. He sat at the kitchen table, staring at the blurry screenshot. He knew the ridge. He'd walked it dozens of times, but he had never noticed anything like this. The thought that something had been sitting there all along, untouched, hidden, kept him frozen in place. By dawn, he was already dressed, waiting by the door. He didn't say much, just nodded when the hunter pulled up. They drove out quietly. No music, no small talk, just the sound of tires on gravel and the wind hitting the windshield. The ridge was steeper than he remembered. They parked at the bottom and hiked the rest. The air was cold, the ground soft under their boots. Birds were quiet that morning. When they reached the spot from the drone footage, it took a moment to orient. But then, just under a patch of collapsed brush, there it was, a shape covered in dirt, moss, and tangled roots. The man knelt down and cleared some of the debris. What they uncovered was a rusted metal door, lying flat against the earth. No markings, no handle, just a panel of steel where there shouldn't have been anything. They stared at it for a long time. Hannah's dad didn't touch it. He just stood there, fists clenched, eyes locked. This wasn't part of any map he would have remembered. The authorities arrived before noon. A pair of deputies marked off the area with tape, then waited for a unit from the state crime lab. The steel panel had clearly been there for a while, covered in layers of soil and moss, but no one could explain why it existed or how it got missed during earlier searches. By mid-afternoon, a forensic team began clearing the area. They used brushes, small shovels, even garden tools to uncover the full outline. It measured roughly the size of a storm drain cover, but heavier, older. They used a crowbar to try lifting it, but the metal resisted. It wasn't until they brought in a portable jack that the panel finally gave way with a dull metallic snap. Beneath it was a square opening, too narrow for anyone to climb down comfortably, but deep enough that the bottom wasn't visible. A musty, stale smell rushed out. The air felt thick, like it hadn't moved in years. Nobody spoke. They all just looked at each other, knowing this wasn't going to be simple. A small inspection camera was lowered into the hole. The feed showed a tight, empty room, concrete walls, no furniture, just a blanket in the corner, and near it, a child's shoe, pink, slightly tilted, as if it had been placed rather than dropped. One officer climbed down with a harness. He moved carefully, checking every inch. There were no wires, no signs of power or equipment, just that shoe. He brought it up in an evidence bag. When Hannah's mother saw it, she didn't speak. She nodded once, then walked out of the room. It was the pair they'd bought the spring before she disappeared. A small tear near the heel. She'd always meant to fix it. There were no bones, no clothes, no trace of a body. But this changed everything. The police now treated the site as part of a possible abduction. Still, one question lingered for everyone who stood around that hole. If someone brought her here, why just leave the shoe? The scene was secured overnight. Officers took shifts, guarding the area under floodlights. By morning, a forensic team re-examined the room with better lighting and tools. There were no fingerprints, No hair, no blood. Even the dirt on the floor seemed undisturbed, almost too clean. Hannah's father asked if someone could have placed the shoe there recently. A detective told him it was possible, but there were no tracks, no fresh soil, nothing that pointed to recent activity. Drone footage from the day before was reviewed again. That's when they noticed something, roughly 70 meters east of the shaft, partially obscured by thick brush. Another small heat signature appeared. It wasn't underground this time. It was sitting on the surface. A new team was sent out immediately, and when they arrived at the coordinates, nestled between tree roots and leaves, they found something unexpected. A white cassette recorder, old, weathered. It was the same model Hannah used to carry in her backpack. The sticker with a cartoon bear was still visible, though faded from sun and rain. The play button was stuck halfway down, as if someone had pressed it too hard. They placed it in an evidence bag and brought it back to the station. The tape inside was old, but still intact. A few days later, at the request of her father, the police agreed to let him hear what was on it. In a quiet room, with just a detective beside him, the recorder was played. The tape began with static, then a voice, soft, a little shaky. "Come on, Toby. This way." A dog barked once. Footsteps crunched over leaves. Then a faint door creaked, and a whisper, "I don't think we're supposed to be here." That was it. No scream, no struggle, just those few seconds, recorded by a girl who never came home. The audio was short, less than a minute, but to Hannah's father, it felt longer than the past 12 years. He asked to hear it again. The same sounds repeated, her voice, the dog, the whisper. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. He just sat there, listening. The technician mentioned something odd. The background noise, the way it echoed, suggested they were near some kind of structure, maybe metal walls, maybe underground, but there was no way to tell exactly where. A specialist tried to clean up the tape for more clues. Nothing new came out. No other voices, no machinery, no names. Just Hannah, her dog, and silence. That night, her father didn't go home. He parked near the ridge and sat there for hours. Not because he expected something to happen. He knew better. He just wanted to be close. It was the first real trace of her since the day she vanished. And yet, it left them with more questions than answers. The following week, search teams returned to the area, this time with cadaver dogs, ground-penetrating radar, and new mapping tools. They scanned every meter near the shaft and where the cassette was found, but nothing else surfaced. Detectives interviewed old neighbors, park rangers, even former construction workers who might have been in the area during the 80s. Still, no leads. No one remembered a shelter, a hatch, or any kind of underground space near that ridge. Hannah's father offered to help, but they said the area had to remain controlled. So instead, he focused on the tape. He played it every night, looking for changes in tone, anything in her voice that might point to where she had been. One evening, while listening with headphones, he noticed something faint near the end of the tape. A hum, low, mechanical, distant. He couldn't tell if it was a vehicle, a machine, or just wind caught on tape, but it was there. He wrote down the timestamp and called the detective the next morning. The detective agreed to review the audio again, this time with a sound engineer from the state lab. They isolated the final few seconds of the recording, slowed it down, cleaned the background noise. The hum was still there, faint, steady, and unnatural. The technician thought it resembled a generator. Older, maybe portable. That was important. It meant wherever Hannah had been, there was power nearby, at least for a while. They compared it with sound samples from known local facilities, cabins, weather stations, outposts, but none matched. Then someone on the team remembered an old ranger cabin, long since decommissioned, a few kilometers from where the cassette was found. It had a backup generator, rarely used, and had been closed off for years after a fire. A search was arranged for the next day. Hannah's father insisted on going with them. This time the detective didn't argue. They hiked out early, following a narrow, overgrown path that hadn't been used in over a decade. Trees had reclaimed most of it. Branches snapped underfoot. Nobody spoke. The cabin sat half-collapsed against the tree line. Its windows were gone. The door hung loose on rusted hinges. They approached slowly. A ranger unlocked what was left of the front entrance and pushed it open. Inside, the air was thick with mold and ash. The walls were scorched from the old fire, but in the back corner, tucked behind a shelf, sat the generator. It hadn't run in years. Still, its make and model matched the sound on the tape almost perfectly. They checked every room. Dust lay untouched, but in a drawer near the old desk they found something wrapped in cloth. A photo. It was a faded picture of a dog, a small black mutt with a red collar. Handwritten beneath it, "Toby, good boy." Hannah's father held it for a long time. They took the photo as evidence, though it held no direct link to the case. No date, no fingerprints. But for Hannah's father, it was more than enough. Toby had gone missing with her. He'd never been found either. The rangers confirmed the cabin had been boarded up shortly after the fire in '87. No one had returned since. But someone, at some point, had left that photo behind. The team searched the surrounding area again. Twice. They even brought in a thermal drone, hoping to find another buried hatch like before. But there was nothing. Just trees, soil, and silence. As they packed up, the detective promised they'd keep looking, but the tone in his voice had changed. Less urgency, more caution. Hannah's dad didn't argue. He just asked to keep the photo. After a moment of hesitation, the detective agreed. Back home, he placed it beside her last school portrait. 2 lives paused in time, one captured in color, the other in fading ink. Weeks passed. The media moved on. Online threads died down. But Hannah's father kept searching in his own way. Not with maps or flashlights now, just by listening. He kept the cassette player on his nightstand. Every evening before bed, he'd press play, close his eyes, and listen to those same seconds. Her voice, the dog, the whisper. Some nights, he swore he heard something new, a breath, a shift in the leaves. But he never wrote those things down. He knew the mind could play tricks, especially when silence was all you had left. One day, without telling anyone, he returned to the ridge. Not with gear, just a notebook, the photo of Toby, and the recorder. He didn't expect to find anything. He just wanted to sit. He placed the recorder on a flat stone, pressed play, and let it run. The quiet echoed around him. Birds, wind, and the slow hum of memory. As the tape clicked to an end, he didn't move. The ridge looked the same as it had for years. Unchanged, uncaring. But something felt different that day. Not in the ground, not in the air, but in him. He wasn't expecting closure anymore. He'd stopped needing answers that never came. What mattered now was holding on to what little remained. A sound, a voice, a dog's bark echoing in time. Before leaving, he tucked the photo of Toby beneath a flat rock beside the old tree, a quiet marker, something only he would recognize. Then he stood, took one last look at the woods, and walked back to the trail without turning around. Hannah's story didn't end with a rescue, or even a truth, but her voice had been heard. And in a world full of noise, that alone was something. A few months later, a small package arrived at the police station. No return address. Inside was a mini DV tape, common in the early 2000s. No note, no fingerprints, no explanation, just the tape. They had it digitized. The footage was grainy, static heavy, but about a minute in, the image steadied. A forest trail, early evening. The camera pointed at a slope of trees, then slowly panned to the right. In the far background, a figure stood still, too far to identify, not moving, just standing. The camera zoomed slightly, then jerked back down. The rest of the video was unremarkable. Branches, leaves, nothing specific. But something caught the detective's attention. The shape of the tree beside the figure. It matched the ridge they'd searched before. Same gnarled trunk, same curve. They pulled satellite images. It checked out. Whoever sent the tape had been on that trail. Recently. They didn't rush in this time. The detective reached out to Hannah's father before organizing another search. He listened quietly as the detective explained. The ridge, the tree, the figure. Then he asked just one question. "Do you think it's her?" The detective paused. "I don't know, but I think someone wants us to believe it is." 2 days later, a new team headed out. They followed the same path from the video, matching landmarks with the footage. At the ridge, they spread out and searched slowly. Same process. Grid mapping, thermal drone, shallow digs. Hours passed. Then, near a half-buried stone wall, a dog's collar was found. The metal tag was scratched but still legible. Toby. No sign of remains, no bones, just the collar. And buried nearby, a waterproof flashlight, modern, recently used. Someone had been there, maybe watching, maybe leaving breadcrumbs. Hannah's father just stared at the tag. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat at the kitchen table with the flashlight and collar in front of him. The recorder was beside them, still working after all these years. He pressed play again. Same soft voice. Same rustle in the background. But now, with the new findings, every sound took on new meaning. Was that a collar jingling? Was that light breathing? Or just tape hiss? He paused the recording and looked at the flashlight. It was a common model, available anywhere. Nothing unique about it, but it was clean. No rust, no dirt in the switch. Whoever left it hadn't been there long ago. The detective called in the morning. The footage had been geolocated more precisely. There was another path branching off near the old ridge, one that wasn't on the original maps. They were going to check it. Hannah's father didn't hesitate. He just said, "Tell me where to meet you." The new path was barely visible, just a slight gap in the tree line, overgrown and uneven. It looked like no one had walked it in decades. The team moved quietly, scanning the ground for fresh signs. The drone flew above, thermal lens sweeping left and right. About 30 minutes in, the signal picked up something. Heat, faint and small. Not a body, not an animal, but warm, concentrated. They moved toward it. At the base of a tree, half buried under pine needles, was a wrapped bundle in plastic. They cleared the cover. Inside were old photographs. Some of Hannah, some of her dog, a few of places near the house. Photos no one outside the family should have. There was no note, no explanation, just a red string tied around the stack. It wasn't evidence. It wasn't a confession, but it was a message. Someone had been watching. Someone still cared. Or someone wanted them to keep looking. The photographs were scanned and checked for fingerprints. None. Even the plastic wrap had been wiped clean. Still, something felt personal. One image showed Hannah holding a drawing, one that had never been shared publicly. It was something she'd made in 2nd grade. Her father kept the original in a photo album at home. He went to check. The original was gone. No break-in. No sign of forced entry. Just missing. That changed everything. Whoever sent the bundle wasn't random. They had been inside the house. The police placed a silent alarm on the property. motion sensors, cameras, but nothing else happened. Weeks passed. Her father stopped trying to sleep. He stayed up most nights, watching the road, checking the cameras, and every night he played that tape, not out of hope anymore, just routine. It was the only sound he still trusted. On a rainy Thursday, the alert went off. Motion detected near the tree line behind the house, south-facing side. The police arrived within 15 minutes. By then, the figure was gone, but the cameras had caught it. A person in a hooded coat, no clear face, medium build, walking slowly, not toward the house but away from it. Officers followed the trail the next morning. Muddy prints led through the woods, then vanished near the creek. But they found something nearby, a child's jacket, neatly folded in a plastic bag, pink, faded, a small patch stitched on the sleeve, Hannah's initials. Her father confirmed it. It was hers, one she wore during the fall of '86. It hadn't been seen since. The material was clean, too clean, preserved. Whoever left it had stored it somewhere safe for decades. This wasn't random. It was intentional, controlled. Someone was leaving pieces behind, one at a time. At dawn, the detective and Hannah's father returned to the creek bank. The ground was soft, churned by recent rain. They followed the footprints for nearly a mile, over fallen logs and through low brush, until they reached an old pump station, unused since the '70s. The door was ajar. Inside, it was dark and cramped. Water dripped from the ceiling into puddles on the floor. They swept flashlights across rusted pipes and cracked control panels. Nothing obvious. Then, in a corner near a blocked-off stairwell, they saw it. Another pink item, half hidden under debris. A small toy recorder, identical to the one Hannah carried. The batteries were dead, but the case was intact. He picked it up carefully, wiping off mud. On the back, someone had written in thin black marker, "I left it for you." His heart pounded. This time it felt like a direct message, an invitation or a warning. The detective called for the crime lab. Samples were taken. Photos were snapped. But for the first time since Hannah disappeared, her father didn't wait for answers. He opened the stairwell door. A narrow shaft led down into darkness. He glanced at the detective. No words were needed. Together, they climbed in. They descended the narrow stairwell 2 at a time. Water dripped from above, pooling on uneven stone steps. Their boots splashed, echoing off rough walls. The air grew colder and heavier. At the bottom, the tunnel forked left and right. The detective shone his light down the left branch. It dead-ended in a pile of rubble. No footprints. No sign of recent passage. They backtracked and took the right fork. This corridor sloped gently downward, walls slick with moisture. The recorder in the detective's hand clicked on when it caught the light, still functional after all these years. Ahead, they spotted a faint glow, a single lamp hanging from a pipe powered by a small battery pack. Beneath it, in neat rows on the damp floor, lay dozens of cassette tapes, some new, some old, each labeled in the same handwriting. For Dad 2, for Dad 3. Hannah's father stared at the stack. It was a roadmap of hope and fear. He reached for the top tape, heart pounding and prepared to press play. He lifted the first tape, marked simply, "For Dad." The detective set up a portable player on a crate. Silence settled, broken only by the hum of the lamp. The tape started with static, then a familiar voice, Hannah's, older but unmistakable. "Dad," she said softly. "I waited." A pause, then a shuffle, the sound of footsteps on stone. A cough, wet and ragged, the same cough they'd heard years ago. She spoke again. "I couldn't get out, not alone, but I'm here. I remember our code, 3 taps means danger. A sudden tapping echoed through the tape. Tap, tap, tap. Hannah's father's hand trembled. He looked at the detective, whose expression was unreadable. Then he pressed stop. No resolution. Just another clue, another message. But this time it was her voice, alive, and that changed everything. They loaded the second tape, for Dad too, and pressed play. Static gave way to a soft hum. Then Hannah's voice, calm. Dad, follow the taps. 3 taps came through clearly. Pause. Then her voice again. Go back to the room where it started. He closed his eyes. The room could only be one place. His own living room, where he first played her toy recorder that night. He looked at the detective, who nodded. They left the shaft and climbed back up the tunnel steps. Outside, the sky was pale, nearing dawn. Mud clung to their boots. The detective called for a car. They drove straight home. In the living room, the same sofa, the same rug, untouched since the case went cold. Hannah's recorder sat on the coffee table. He picked it up and tapped 3 times on the side, just as she did in her message. At once, the recorder clicked on. No tape inserted, but through the speaker came a soft whisper. Good. Now listen. The living room grew still. Hannah's father held his breath as the recorder played on its own. The whisper came again, clearer this time. In the closet. Heart pounding, he moved to the hallway and opened her old bedroom door. The closet door stood slightly ajar, dust motes drifting in the beam of his flashlight. Inside, he found a small metal box tucked behind hanging coats. It was locked with a simple latch. He pried it open with his pocket knife. Inside the box lay a microcassette and a folded note. The note read, "Play this at the creek." No signature, just those words, in handwriting he recognized as Hannah's. He took the microcassette and recorder and stepped outside. Dawn had fully broken. The creek, where they'd last found Toby's collar, ran quietly behind the house. He pressed play. Hannah's voice, huskier now, spoke. By the water's edge, where the mud is soft, dig until you feel wood. The tape ended with a soft gust of wind. He turned to the detective, voice steady but urgent. We go now. They reached the creek bank where the collar had been found. The ground was soft and muddy, stones slick with dew. The detective knelt and brushed away leaves, revealing the spot. Hannah's father dug with his hands, moving earth until he felt the edge of something solid. Fingers scraped against wood. He cleared more mud, uncovering a small trap door set flush into the ground. It was weathered but intact. Hinges rusted. Together, they lifted it. Beneath was a shallow cavity, just big enough for a person to kneel. Inside lay a single object wrapped in oilcloth. He unwrapped it carefully. It was Hannah's backpack, the one she'd carried that evening. The zipper was stuck, but gave way with a gentle tug. Papers spilled out. School worksheets, a pressed flower, and a small notebook. He opened the notebook and saw her handwriting. On the first page, "If you find this, Dad, you're getting close." His voice caught. The detective shone his light into the cavity. No sign of Hannah, but a thin wooden panel leaned against the far wall. It looked like a door. Hannah's father slid the panel aside, revealing a dark crawl space beyond. He paused, then crawled in, flashlight in hand, ready to follow her final message wherever it led. The crawl space was narrow, just wide enough for him to wriggle forward. His flashlight beam revealed rough-hewn walls, carved stone, and a low ceiling. Mud dripped from tiny cracks above. He moved slowly, each breath conscious. The detective stayed at the entrance, shining a second light in for safety. After a few meters, the passage opened into a small chamber, no bigger than a garden shed. At the center stood a wooden crate, sealed with old leather straps. He knelt, fingers trembling, and unbuckled it. Inside lay a single photograph in a plastic sleeve. It showed Hannah and Toby side by side, standing in the yard that summer day. The color had faded, but their faces were clear. Behind the photograph was a letter, folded. He unfolded it with care. "I'm sorry I couldn't come home. I was scared. He said I'd see him if I stayed, but I couldn't leave Toby behind. He needed me. He's safe now." His heart seized. No signature, no date, just her words. Silence settled over the chamber. He tucked the photograph and letter into his jacket. This was the proof he'd waited for. Proof that Hannah had been here, and somehow that she was still looking out for her dog. He rose, cradling her photograph and letter. The chamber felt impossibly still, as if time itself paused. He pressed the letter to his chest, then stood and backed out into the tunnel. Outside, the detective waited. His flashlight caught the wet stone on the walls and the look in Hannah's father's eyes. Relief mingled with sorrow. There were no cheers, no sudden rescues, just two men standing in damp silence. They climbed back up, crate in hand. At the creek bank, he set it on the ground with care. The morning light warmed the wet earth. "Do you want to call her?" the detective asked quietly. He hesitated, then lifted his phone. His thumb hovered over the dialer. Then he closed his hand, tucking the phone into his pocket. "She's here," he said, voice soft. "I have what she left." He turned and walked toward home. The detective followed, leaving the crate by the water's edge, an offering, a final marker. Hannah wasn't lost anymore. In the end, her voice guided him, and her own message brought him back. Back at home, Hannah's father placed the letter and photograph on the mantel beside her school portrait. He stood there for a long time, tracing her handwriting with a trembling finger. The house felt different. The weight of years of uncertainty had lifted slightly. He could almost hear her footsteps, the soft click of her recorder. He packed the photograph and letter carefully into a folder labeled "Found." Then he went to Toby's grave in the backyard, marked by a simple wooden cross. Kneeling, he laid the photograph on the grass beside the marker. "Thank you, Hannah," he whispered, "for coming back to me." A gentle breeze rustled the leaves. He closed his eyes and held the letter to his heart. For the first time since she vanished, he felt peace. Later that day, the detective delivered the remaining tapes and crate contents to the lab. They would catalog everything, but the case was essentially over. The evidence no longer held questions. It held answers. Hannah's story didn't end with a rescue, but with her voice guiding her father home. And that, he realized, was enough. The next morning, Hannah's father and the detective met at the station. A single crate and its contents lay on the table: tapes, notes, the photo, and the toy recorder. They reviewed each item, but only one new clue emerged. On the back of the pink shoe's sole, etched lightly in the rubber, was a set of numbers: 12, 7, 86. Not random. A date. He stared at it. December 7th, 1986. Just weeks after Hannah vanished. He'd never noticed the shoe's worn sole. Now it pointed to a day they'd overlooked. They decided to revisit that date. Weather records, newspaper archives, even school calendars. But the key was personal: Hannah's diary. He retrieved the pages she'd written before she disappeared. December 7th was empty. No entry. But the page was torn, ripped out cleanly. That tear had been replaced by a new, handwritten note in the crate. "You know where to look." Silence filled the room. The detective and Hannah's father exchanged a look. They both understood. The case was guiding them block by block to its end. That afternoon, he sat at his old desk, diary in front of him. The page opposite December 7th was stained and creased, as if handled often. He held his breath and turned it carefully. Under a faded entry about a winter carnival was a hastily drawn map, just a rough sketch. The Wells house, the creek, the ridge, and a small X near the weathered oak at the edge of the property. His heart pounded. He recognized that tree. He'd climbed it as a boy. He grabbed his coat and drove there with the detective. The oak's bark was scarred, branches low to the ground. Beneath it, the snow had melted in a perfect circle. He knelt and brushed away leaves, then found a shallow depression. He reached in and pulled out a metal key, antique, ornate, and cold. No tag, no label, just a small symbol etched on the handle, a pair of interlocking circles. He turned it over in his hand, eyes filling. This was Hannah's final clue, left for him to find after all these years. Before dusk, they would be back at the creek, at the pump station, the shaft, and finally, the place where it all began. And they both hoped that key would unlock the one door that remained closed since 1986.